Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs have wound down. The sports stop sporting like we all want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. It means there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on today's show, Doc Rivers and the Bucks make it official. Their finalized staff is announced. We already knew the names, but we find out the roles for a few of the new names. So we'll take a look at that, what it could mean as early as this week when Summer League tips off for the Bucks. A big date, actually last night, for AJ Green. We'll explain what we mean behind that. And one other free agency target that was reportedly out there for the Bucks, they fell short on. Spoiler alert, it was a name we mentioned on yesterday's show. But we take a look at what the Bucks could possibly have left up their sleeve. Coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Camille, we start with the coaching staff. So it was finalized on Monday. We already basically knew who the final members of the coaching staff were, or what this full coaching staff was going to be, I should say. We shared those names about a week or so ago. But the most interesting part of all of it to me was we got some context in terms of role clarity for a couple of those coaches. So when we talked about it, we said, okay, by my count, this is still about the same size coaching staff as Doc Rivers joked was just too much and more that he was used to. That is still very much the case. So as we look at the assistant coaches only, excluding the player development piece, there are 7 of them for the Bucks. Darvin Ham is the lead assistant. And the way that it's structured in the release that the Bucks put out, both in how they are listed and even the visual graphic, I take that to mean this is the pecking order for all of these coaches. So Darvin Ham, number 1 as your lead assistant. Greg Buckner, who came over from the Cavaliers, who was the associate head coach for the Cavs for a number of years. He is number 2 behind Darvin Ham. Then you have Dave Yeager and Rex Kalamian, who have a long history with Doc Rivers. Our guy, the Prunt dog, Joe Prunty, is there right behind them. Vin Baker, another holdover, and Pete Dominguez, who was added, shortly around the All-Star break last year to this staff. So those are the 7 that are first and second row assistant coaches only, no player development. The 3 names that are the player development additions or changes here, Jack Harum, who had been within the organization for the last handful of years, but Jason Love, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I believe, that comes over from Philadelphia, former collegiate player. He has that history with Doc Rivers and was a development coach and skill development as well, player and skill development with the Sixers for the past few years. He's going to work in the same capacity with the Bucks. And then Spencer Rivers, who, if the name sounds familiar, yes, it is the son of Glenn Doc Rivers. He does have NBA experience, as I believe it was the Pistons that he was within their organization, video coordinator, something along those lines the last year. But that's the 10 names on the staff for Doc Rivers. So again, we knew the 10 names, about 10 days ago, but now we see it laid out of, okay, here's the pecking order. Here's the guys, when Doc specifically mentioned development and John Horst, here's those guys that are going to work on it.
For years, we've made the joke of like, we don't really know what assistant coaches do. We don't know what their roles are. We just see assistant coach listed. And then we might look at their past and say, oh, they have a history of player development, or they have a history with defensive schemes, and just try to, from the outside looking in, kind of peg what we think their roles might be. And before we got the order of what the benches were going to be, and then this additional nugget of who are like the player development coaches, all we really had before was Doc coming out, making it known what like his summer league plans. I'm saying like Pete Dominguez is going to coach the summer league team, and our player development guys are going to be the assistant coaches. And we were like, oh, looking forward to seeing who those guys are, so we have an idea of who is going to be those guys who are going to really be in charge of player development and trying to spearhead that for the organization. So seeing the graphic that the Bucks put out, where they actually list out, as you mentioned, in order, where you see Doc Rivers, head coach, space, Darvin Ham, Greg Buckner, Dave Yeager, Rex Kalamian, Joe Prunty, Ben Baker, Pete Dominguez, space, Jack Harum, Jason Love, Spencer Rivers. All of them are also named assistant coaches, but they also have a player development title thereafter their name and responsibility. So it's really interesting too, just seeing the team being very forthright and saying, here are the guys that we have on staff right now for player development, which again links back into what we've been talking about is a trend for this team so far this season, the way we didn't think they were going to swing, which is really leaning into that player development. But as we've mentioned, we do think the new CBA and the second apron and all these rules are going to make player development something that a lot of teams are putting more interest in, putting a lot more manpower into, and really trying to take seriously. And the Bucks are looking like a team, again, that is really going to look to embrace that. I know people are seeing some of the vets that are signing in free agency and thinking like, these young guys are going to get buried again. But that's not the case. Like, that was very clear from the start that free agency was going to be used with those 3 spots that are available to try to find some more immediate help that can be plugged in right away. But yet and still, these young guys are going to be able to compete, and they are still expecting things of them as well. So seeing so many assistant coaches with 3 with that player development focus just again emphasizes how important that is going to be for this team going forward.
And just to add some more clarity on those 3 developmental names here for the Bucks, Harum has been with the organization for 6 years within the Bucks organization, and spent some time with the Wisconsin Herd the past 5 seasons. He is a Wisconsin native as well, and was the Bucks player development coordinator within the organization even prior to Doc Rivers. He also spent time collegiately, Minnesota Duluth. He was a coach there. And what's most intriguing to me too, when you talk about the development capacity, he was assistant coach at IMG Academy in Florida for 1 season, which you think about that being a pipeline to get to this level, to get to the NBA and develop your skills. So it all kind of ties in together there with Harum, who again is going to be the lead of the development staff for the Bucks. And then the other names that we mentioned as well, some of the newer additions here, Jason Love, who I had said spent some time with Doc Rivers in Philadelphia. He was there since, I believe, 2019. So a lot of history there. Played overseas, played collegiately, I believe, at Xavier as well. And I think, look, that's kind of the easy trap to fall into when you say, okay, this guy was in Philly, and look at some of the guys that were young in Philly and what they're at now. So he was there up through last year. He must have played a pretty big role in the development of a guy like Tyrese Maxey. He may have, right? I guess we'll find out this year. But when you look up and down at this coaching staff, we've talked before about the big difference being these are Doc Rivers guys, and it's experienced is the big change. Last year, it was the opposite end of the spectrum of, okay, you got these 2 veteran coaches. One of them exits just before the season starts, and then a whole lot of young guys. This staff is night and day different in that you have guys that are very experienced, but I think most importantly, as we heard Doc Rivers really mention this time and time again last year, these are all guys he has an extensive relationship with outside of Darvin Ham. But even that is, hey, Darvin Ham's, a guy that has been a head coach in the league. He knows these players as well. They've crossed in the same circles as well as former players and being coaches in the NBA. But outside of that, Dave Yeager, Rex Kalamian, Pete Dominguez, these are all guys that have years and years of experience with Doc. So does Jason Love. Vin Baker, kind of the same mold as Darvin Ham, but Joe Prunty, he got to know last year. Greg Buckner, he has a little bit of a relationship with as well. So the two things that stand out to me about this staff are experience and Doc's people.
Experience for sure is one of those for me. And Doc mentioned that himself, just saying like this might be the most experienced bench that I've ever put together. And he mentioned how much he's looking forward to that. So I can't wait to see how it all plays out. I did see that former Bucks assistant coach Patrick Mutombo landed in Memphis under Taylor Jenkins. I saw that they pretty much completely revamped that coaching staff. So just in case anybody was interested on where a former Bucks assistant coach ended up, that would be in Memphis, which, as we know, with Taylor Jenkins, there are some ties to Milwaukee, given that he's from Bud's coaching tree. So I thought that was really interesting too, that we found out where he landed as well. And all these different coaching announcements are coming out for various teams across the league. So it makes sense. I mean, summer league's getting ready to kick off for a lot of teams in Vegas. The Cali league's already going. So the timing makes a lot of sense too.
When we come back, we mentioned that the market for free agency. On yesterday's show, we talked about, okay, who are the best names that are out there? And that was under the premise of, what if the Bucks do make a move for Brook Lopez and it frees up some extra money to spend? But just want to take a deeper look at the market. What's actually out there? What can you expect? One name we've talked about in the past is also gone now. And there was another name we kind of kicked around is, hey, could they free up the money to get him? And as we would eventually learn, they reportedly reached out and even used one of their own players to heavily recruit this guy before he ultimately chose to stay in Miami. So we'll give you the details on that and take a look at the rest of the free agency market coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Well, this next segment of Locked On Bucks is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, social media keeps us all connected to each other's lives. It keeps us in the know and in the loop about the Bucks free agency moves, coaching changes, who are they targeted in trades, all of that. But sometimes social media can be a negative in your life as well. Do you use it to compare yourselves to others? Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to really envy what you see elsewhere rather than looking within to what it is that you actually have. These are all things you can examine further with the help of BetterHelp. Therapy may not seem like it's for you until you start to delve into it and see what it is you want to work on the most within your life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you need to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So, Camille, we talked about the free agency market on yesterday's show, and most of our conversation was under the premise of let's entertain this trade that was floated out there of, hey, would the Bucks look to partner with the Pistons to offload Brook Lopez's contract, save some money, bring back a younger player in Jalen Duren? And in doing so, you get younger, number one, you get under that second apron. It not only frees up money, it opens up other options and paths for you, like a mid-level exception to use. And one of the names that we pondered, hey, if you had the mid-level, could you target this guy? Was Haywood Highsmith of the Miami Heat. And we even joked, look, one of the things that gives you pause with targeting Heat guys in free agency is, is it like the Spurs in years past where it works with this coaching staff in this system? When you get outside of it, not so much. But Barry Jackson, reporter in Miami, I believe for the Sun Sentinel, covers the Heat, and he had put out there on Monday, the Bucks aggressively pursued Haywood Highsmith so much that they used Damian Lillard as the recruiter to try to bring Haywood Highsmith to the Bucks. Ultimately, he chose to stay in Miami with the Heat for about $8 million extra per season than the Bucks could have paid him. But as Barry Jackson pointed out, part of it came down to, look, the Bucks can only offer me the vet minimum. It sounded as though it was something he was still kind of considering, but ultimately just decided, I got to get the money now. I'm still a young guy. Let me get those contracts. And then once I get some more years, then you can shift your focus to, you know what, I got paid. Maybe I'll just go to a place I want to be and focus on winning.
That's why free agency is so interesting, because Miami wasn't thinking about Hayward Highsmith too much, because they were out here chasing DeMar DeRozan and some other free agents on their list. So they were kind of like, well, we'll get to that later. But luckily for Miami, the market for him just didn't develop in the way that, he might have thought that it would, or as quickly as Highsmith thought that it would. So because of time, they were able to make a deal. He is somebody who had mentioned, like, I would love to stay in Miami. I want to try to stay in Miami, but I could see being courted by Damian Lillard. I saw also that the Phoenix Suns had interest in him as well. Yeah. Another team that could have only offered the minimum, but also offer like, hey, it's a chance to really compete for a championship here because of the talent that we have on this roster. So, like, are you willing to take that pay cut? And ultimately, he didn't have to, because Miami was able to come back to the table with him and offer him that 2-year, $11 million deal to keep him on the books. So shout out to Dame for trying to use that relationship, trying to work those phones and say, like, hey, there's an opportunity here. Consider it. But I can understand, one, you can get more money in Miami, and two, it's a place where you were comfortable, a place that took a chance on you to begin with, and you wanted to stay. So it makes sense to see him staying in Miami, although I just thought the timing of it was so interesting, given that we had just talked about it, and then you see a report saying like even Dame was on the phone trying to get him here. So that's just the way it breaks sometimes.
2-year deal, $11 million per year. I would assume, given his age, this wouldn't have been a standard 1-year vet minimum deal that the Bucks would have been offering. It would have been some type of 1+1 or something to try and entice him even more. But 27 years old, had a couple of flashes. And again, that's one of the things that also worries you when you talk about not only this guy really worked in Miami, we've seen other guys within that system not really be the same when they left, but also when guys have big games against you and you aggressively go after them. I'm not saying that's the case in this instance here, but those sometimes have a tendency to backfire on you. But 27 years old, has very good size at 6'7", a very good defender, not to Giannis levels, but similar to Giannis in that he got better year after year statistically, basically across the board. I mean, it was just 6 points per game that he averaged with the Heat last season in 20 minutes per game. But his field goal percentage, effective field goal, 3-point shooting, all of it went up the last few years. Free throws, doesn't get to the line a whole lot. That went up as well. So that's the type of move we've kind of talked about before. That's exactly the move you want to see the Bucks aggressively targeting in free agency. Of this is a player that has something. He's young. We feel like maybe he's not going to be an all-star, but he's going to keep getting better and be a pretty serviceable role player for you that could, kind of fill that role that you saw Pat Connaughton occupy for his first few years in Milwaukee.
And that's really important. We've talked about this briefly recently, but just given the fact that Pat Connaughton's a great example to use, where it was a guy coming off, I think he spent 2 or 3 years in Portland before he made his way to Milwaukee, and the player development that happened with him while he was here to really evolve into a role player, it was special to see. And I know, I can already hear y'all in my head. I can see the comments already. I know how y'all feel about Pat Connaughton now in this moment, but think about who he was during that championship run leading up to that. You can say his game has fallen off some. All right, I'll hear you on that. But the point remains of like trying to get a younger guy coming off of a contract where you're going to have some time to work with on that second contract. Those guys who can really improve on that second contract are really, if you can find them, that's really finding some gold, because those are going to be smaller contracts normally. And the value that you get from that is just going to be outstanding. Having serviceable and reliable role players is so necessary. And I would think that a lot of Bucks fans understand that as well, just given how the makeup of the team has been over the last few years while chasing championships, and understanding just what a role player can do. Like, guys can really swing a game or two if they get hot, if they do their job, if they start in their role, as we hear so often. So even looking at the free agency market, like, we can talk about this in the next segment, but like, are there any names that kind of fit into that category where it's not going to be a big splashy signing? And I mean, honestly, we already know all the Bucks have to offer at this point anyways are minimum. So trying to get some of those guys might be a little bit out the picture because you might want to have to spend a little bit more to get them and retain their services for a bit longer. But we've talked about the pool of free agents, especially with the bigs, how there just aren't that many out there that are really super interesting to you. But are there any that stand out as some possible guys who could pop on a second or maybe third contract?
Well, one name that I was, again, just as you kind of floated out the caution of, look, I know I mentioned that name that can trigger some Bucks fans and Pat Connaughton, but let me point out X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do the same when I say a name in terms of the bigs that I was probably more excited about than most. I still would say the level of excitement was very, very minimal, but that name is now gone from the free agency market. So we'll take a look at what is actually left out there. We heard one analogy on a national show putting it out there about how to view what's left out there in what officially is this day 2 of free agency, is the moratorium was lifted. So this is the official start of free agency, and it's already gone. It's like showing up to a retail store the morning of Black Friday rather than going midnight the night before or whatever and seeing, oh man, everything's gone. That's kind of what we've hit here in this phase of free agency. So we'll get into that about who left, who's no longer on the board, and what is actually out there for the Bucks, and why it was a big day for AJ Green. We'll have that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends at FanDuel, as we all love sports so much we don't want them to stop. But now the playoffs have wound down and we see fewer and fewer games. It means the sports aren't sporting just like we want them to. FanDuel lets us all keep the sports going whenever we want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you are in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone every day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and constantly find yourself turning down the volume because of all that shouting you hear, means it's time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for you every single day, bringing you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, and it streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Really quick here, Camille, that name that I referenced, Daniel Tice, is gone,
Yes.
signing with the New Orleans Pelicans. And look, at this point, Daniel Tice may be signing with the Pelicans to be their starting center. I mean, this isn't Locked On Pels. Jake will handle that, but are they going to play Zion at the 5 and Daniel Tice is their bet? There surely has to be something else that the Pelicans are working on and cooking up rather than just going at it with only Daniel Tice.
I feel like Tice for them was probably like a stopgap of like, if nothing else pans out, at the very least, we can go this direction. It's not the direction I think they would want to go in like as a first choice. But as you mentioned, of him being a third, fourth big, like that makes a lot more sense for where he currently is. And we talked about, I was like, I'm not even sure I want him on the Bucks for that. But he is in New Orleans, which is a team, to make it right back to the Bucks, a team that we have heard a lot of news about, some scuttlebutt about them being active and trying to find that starting center, about them trying to offload Brandon Ingram, and them having some interest in a Brook Lopez. So seeing the signing there as well was like, I wonder if that does kind of take you out of that race, or is there something else going on where there might be a trade that they are looking to still acquire another center? Like, are they just someone who could still possibly be on a Brook Lopez list?
We did see that name mentioned by Will Guillory. It's the dangerous part about aggregation. I don't think Will Guillory outright came out and said, look, here's what's going to happen. But it was a report that, you know, it's telephone, telegram, telewrestler that you hear where it just, hey, did you hear this? Did you hear this? And it blew up into something else. We don't have time to get into it on today's show. We'll probably save that for tomorrow to get into what that rumor was exactly. But yes, they are an interesting team to keep an eye on. We mentioned the Pistons yesterday, and they got to add some salary. Are they a team that would possibly have an interest in helping you out? helping you out is maybe a stretch too, but taking Brook Lopez's contract, giving you some cap savings there. Pels, I suppose, are another team to monitor as well. But as we talk about, the free agent market, all those names that we mentioned yesterday, take Haywood Highsmith off the list. I don't think the Bucks are really in the market for Tyus Jones and looking for a backup point guard there. So you just go one by one. Daniel Tice, I don't think we mentioned on yesterday's show, but he's off the list as well. By my count, I believe he was the last real big left on the free agency market, at least guys that had NBA experience that were on a team last year, all gone now. So now you wonder, okay, are they just going into it with same situation as we had the last few years? These three guys are our bigs, and we're just going to pray for health. When you look at the rest of the wings, there's not much left out there. Haywood Highsmith was very encouraging. Disappointing that you missed out on him, but I think very encouraging to learn these are the type of things that the Bucks are targeting, because again, you can argue, hey, they're 2 to 3 years late to the party, but it's what we've been calling for the last couple of years. And it does seem like we finally started to see that shift towards it this offseason. The only problem is it's the offseason where you are as strapped as you have ever been in terms of what you have available to go get those pieces.
Yeah, super strapped, which is why another name we brought up, if they were able to find a way to clear some space, was like Isaac Okoro, that younger guy who has shown some flashes. But again, with how the current salary
if
cap
Haywood
set up,
Highsmith's getting $11 million, Isaac Okoro
exactly,
is in
like,
that
it
market.
does not feel like that is going to be within the realm of possibility. And he's a restricted free agent, so we know that Cleveland can match on that. And then you're looking like, do you want a Gordon Hayward? Like, do you want to take that chance on that type of vet who's lost a step, but we know he can shoot, he can handle, he can create, just not as he did in his prime? Or do you look towards the bigs, which they're both smaller options, which are Paul Reed? B-Ball Paul is a name that's been popping up. A lot of fans being like kind of interested if we can see we can get Paul over here. But him or Precious Achiuwa, again, both of them bring some really interesting things to the table when it comes to defense, but they're both like 6'8", 6'9", so they're smaller guys innately. So when you said earlier, like, the last of the true bigs to be gone off the board, if someone was listening, like, what about B-Ball Paul and Precious Achiuwa? It's like, they're bigs, yes, but they're also under 6'10". So there's just a little bit of a difference there. So like, that's what the market is right now. And that's part of why having 14 guys on the roster is what I like. Just keep that 15 spot open in case the market shakes out in a way where somebody who you didn't think would still be available and might come and play for a vet min actually does, because that's going to be an opportunity for them to show off and show their skill sets off for that next contract.
Yeah, Paul Reed, that's a good point in that I don't think you're bringing in Paul Reed to play center for you. I mean, I know he played that, replacing Joel Embiid during the injured moments last season, but to your point, he's probably more best served as a 4 now at this point. And Precious Achiuwa, he can do it. He can take on some of those matchups. You're not getting any rim protection in some matchups as well. It's going to be a tougher draw, but I suppose if you're looking for more of we want close to a traditional big that we can plug in there if we give Brook Lopez a rest or God forbid there's an injury, Precious Achiuwa is probably it. That's all that's going to be left out there on the market. So it's starting to get to a really thin time out there. And I mentioned, I think it was Nate Duncan and John Hollinger noting, this is free agency started on the 6th officially, where the moratorium was lifted, and you start to see names being signed. But at this point, as they put it, anyone that's left out there, maybe they could contribute as like a 9th or 10th guy, but to level set, that's what you're looking at in terms of the names that are left out there. So it's not like when we saw the Bucks get Brook Lopez, which I believe today was the 6-year anniversary of the signing of Brook Lopez. Bobby Portis a little bit later into the weirder offseason that was November as well. It's not going to be like that. It's been a very, very strange offseason, and I think the Paul George piece had a lot to do with that. The last thing to note is I don't think it's a really big surprise here, but AJ Green's contract fully guaranteed, so no move was made there. He was not waived or any trade. So AJ Green, to no one's surprise, going to be a big contributor and a big piece of this Bucks team this upcoming season.
It's good to see. Like the AJ Green story is one of those ones where you're like, this could be something really cool to continue to follow, like going from the two-way to getting a contract to getting a roster spot. And now seeing that his spot is guaranteed again for another season. It's just a cool story for AJ Green and just his development as well. But I mean, we saw it last year. He does have an NBA skill set with his ability to shoot the ball. So when you have somebody with that type of talent, you want to hold on to him, especially when the contract is as reasonable as it is right now with AJ Green. We've mentioned a lot where the Bucks are with their salary cap sheet right now and how having this younger talent on these more manageable contracts are so important. AJ Green was somebody who was named by Doc Rivers and John Horst as just somebody who's they expect to be part of the rotation and contribute to helping this team try to win a championship this year. So I can't wait again to see like the training camp battles and see if he can actually earn that starting spot and that two guard, which I think is going to be a really fun competition. But like you said, no surprise that AJ Green, made that deadline that his contract was guaranteed. He just has a skill set that you've got to hold on to and really explore to see what can come of it.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, we talked about it yesterday too. He's one of the names you at least lump in for the time being of could he be your starting two guard when the season tips off in October. So congrats there on that front to AJ Green. That'll do it for today's show. Tomorrow we hit the midpoint of the week. So we are 3 days away from summer. I almost said Summerfest, Summer League officially beginning for the Bucks. So we expect to learn the Summer League roster any day now. Maybe we'll even have it in time for tomorrow's show. Maybe there'll be some more free agency moves to dig into as well. That'll do it for today, though. For Camille, I am Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.